3 листопада.
It's November 3, Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform starts its operation. My name is Svetlana Chaparenko, and now we will be talking about the important decisions to be adopted by the Parliament of Ukraine and what are the changes that will happen to the citizens in the near future. Joining us online is Fedir Venislavskyi, People's Deputy of Ukraine, member of the Parliamentary Committee on National Security, Defense and Intelligence, representative of the President of Ukraine to the Parliament of Ukraine. Mr. Fedir, good afternoon. Can you hear us? Yes, I can hear and see you. We're not seeing you. If you have an opportunity to check your camera, please do so. Seems like everything is all right on my end. Well, fine. Good. So, Mr. Fedir, even Valery Zaluzhny stated that the categories of citizens to be trained and mobilized will be expanded. Is it really planned on the legislative level? When should we expect it and in which format it's about to happen? Well, from the point of view of activity of the Parliament, from the point of view of legislation, there are no changes to there are no reasons for radical changes of legislation related to mobilization. In fact, the conscription centers are a component of the armed forces of Ukraine. They are guided by the officers who submit to the commander-in-chief. So this is why if the management of security and defense forces deems there are grounds for expansion of categories of citizens of Ukraine to be mobilized, they have all opportunities to do so within the law in force. Talking about the gaps, or not even the gaps, but certain regulations that allow certain categories of the citizens to abuse these or those opportunities known to wide crowds, like acquisition of second or third higher education and taking care of disabled persons. Such things were considered by the Parliament of Ukraine, and we've made relevant amendments to the laws. And I think that there will be no certain cardinal changes in legislation to implement those changes mentioned by the Commander-in-Chief. But we keep working on improvement of legislation in the area of security and defense and mobilization. The Parliament continues reviewing relevant draft laws, and I think that shortly we have all grounds to assume that the Parliament is about to approve the law on amendment of the joint register of persons to be mobilized, and it will start working to the full extent. Yes, we keep working on this, and at the same time we keep working on ensuring bigger funding of the security and defense sector. This is something that we've been working on during the latest plenary weeks when the Parliament was getting together for meetings and sessions. Until the end of the year, the Parliament is supposed to approve all of the legislation related to the documents related to the operation of military medical commissions. Is Parliament going to make it by the end of the year? Yes, improvement of activity of conscription centers and medical commissions is what our Committee on National Security, Defense and Intelligence is doing. They work quite intensely, and I think the mechanisms to improve the activity of the medical commissions, military medical commissions, and medical service and the armed forces are supposed to be approved shortly, adopted shortly, and recently the Parliament adopted relevant changes such as electronic queues during the military medical commissions and expansion of medical institutions where the persons to be mobilized can undergo military medical commission, because previously they were only the military medical institutions. Now there are civil medical institutions added to those lists. But generally we keep working in our committee on different issues different working groups identify problems in legislation, gaps in legislation, and we try to fill them. There is a draft law in the Parliament to limit the age of students subject to mobilization. It was expected to be voted for in September. So what is the main obstacle for its adoption for the time being? Well, for the time being, I cannot stop the work on it. It's suspended. Our committee and Committee on Education, Science and Innovation is discussing the better ways to word the correct rules, which on one hand would not restrict their constitutional rights to education, and on the other hand would not allow those facts of abuse that just were covered by your colleague journalists the day before yesterday, when the number of persons aged from 25 and on decided to acquire second or third higher education. And I think that as soon as the consensus is achieved in the Parliament, this draft law can be later on adopted. Well, it's a painful issue for the volunteers, the creation of joint system of control over the medical aid. We hear a lot from the volunteers that things are not as smooth as it's being depicted in the media. So implementation of this system, how it will influence the work of volunteers, and do the members of the Parliament listen to the volunteers in terms of their problems? Well, definitely the needs of security and defense sector, specifically those covered by Commander-in-Chief, is something that a large fraction of which is covered by the volunteers. It's a very valuable support, and complication of this help, in terms of applications, their processing, transforming of volunteer activity into bureaucratic mire, is not something that is in line with the requirements and desires of our security and defense sector. And the Parliament wants to avoid the creation of such extra complicated mechanisms. We discussed this issue in our Security, Defense and Intelligence Committee, so all those issues that you've just brought up, they are supposed to be solved on the level of regulations, and we recommend our colleagues in the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine and other components of the executive branch to take into account that excessive bureaucratization may be of harm to all the processes in the government. But we're not talking about the new legislation here. President Zelensky equalized corruption with the high treason, and there is the relevant draft law registered with the Parliament. Should we expect it to be adopted shortly? So this is something that is not related to the activities of the Committee for National Security, Defense and Intelligence. This is why I cannot give relevant comments about the development of this draft law, but the fact that there is a demand for such law is something that I can convince you of, and the deputies are ready to support them. Well, another question not quite related to the work of your committee, but we would like to hear your opinion. Today, the House of Representatives adopted the law on support of Israel, no matter that President Biden wanted to unite it with the support of Ukraine in the one law. So can we expect Ukraine to be brought back in this legislation during voting in Senate? Will anything change in terms of support of Ukraine in the context of war in Israel? Well, I agree with you that it's not quite something that our committee works on. The colleagues from our committee were visiting the United States of America last week, and they were discussing with the senators and congressmen and representatives of the House of Representatives. They were discussing this issue, and we hope that as this draft law is passed in the Senate, we have chances to get the support for Ukraine. But even if we consider a negative option anyway, the law to support Ukraine will be adopted. We have support, we have bipartisan support in the United States, so I wouldn't expect any extremely negative results in terms of support of Ukraine. Maybe the issue will be a little bit protracted. Maybe we should not expect for the amounts that were stated by the President Biden, but the fact that Ukraine will not be deprived of military support from our most powerful partner, I think there should be no doubt that we're just talking about certain discussions and negotiations. And since there will be elections last year in the United States, this issue is getting more and more political nature. But I think that Ukraine has all chances to get the support from the United States along with Israel, as it was stated before. And in continuation of the issue of war in Israel, does the parliament continue considering the issue of recognizing Hamas as a terroristic organization? Well, you know, there's a lot of components. This issue is being considered by the parliament, but I cannot say that there is a unanimous decision to support this initiative, because we have to understand that for Ukraine, the support is also provided by the Asian countries, who are not always enticed to see Hamas as a terroristic organization. I think that President Zelensky sent a very clear characteristic of this terroristic attack of Hamas on Israel, and talking about recognition of it as a terroristic organization. It's the responsibility of the Committee for International Relations, and we will listen to their recommendations as well as recommendations of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But we should make sure we don't make any harm to the matters of national security. We have questions on the floor. Mr. Fedir, good afternoon. Marina Shenkarenko, Ukrinform. Recently, the head of Ministry of Digitalization, Mikhail Fedorov, announced a pilot project of smart mobilization. So what is state aspiring to achieve, and is it a solution for a problem of understaffing in certain offices? I think it's a wonderful initiative in terms of digitalization. Ukraine demonstrates a great example for many other countries. Just last week, we had representatives of the Defense Committee of the Parliament of Sweden visiting us, and they expressed their astonishment with the fact that Ukraine continues implementing digital technologies even during the war. But what I have to tell you, digital technologies, they have two key goals. First is to avoid or minimize corruption risks, which so as soon as we find out a person who is supposed to get a service, then there is the temptation of corruption risk is avoided. And another component is a maximum facilitation of mobilization procedures, when people to be mobilized can, through their personal electronic cabinet, enter and add the maximum information about their education, marital status, health condition, and provide the grounds that can be used for exemption or postponement of mobilization, identify their military profession. So it will take into account to the fullest extent the individual properties of the people to be subject to mobilization, and if such people express a desire to serve, say, in airborne assault forces, and they are being forced to serve in other branch, that's not quite correct. So this pilot project aims to take into account to the maximum extent what the people subject to mobilization desire, and to facilitate the bureaucratic procedures from the point of view of activities of the conscription centers. So I clearly support this initiative. I think it has very good prospects to be spread over the whole system of mobilization as soon as the results will be assessed and analyzed. Mr. Fedir, thank you very much for your comprehensive answers. I'm reminding you joining us was Fedir Venislavskyi, People's Deputy of Ukraine, member of the Parliamentary Committee of National Security, Defense and Intelligence, representative of the President of Ukraine in the Parliament of Ukraine, and we will be back online at 1300. We'll talk about the situation in the south. Thank you for staying tuned.